The first thing I want you to do is to stop watching this video. That seems like an odd request, but there's something that needs to be done before this goes any further. I need you to seek out the closest mirror. Stand in front of it and just observe. Tell me, what do you see? Do you see yourself? I bet you do. That seems to be the trend among most people. I am not most people. I am, for the most part, ordinary. I do all the things you would expect a 20-year-old girl to do. I drink a lot of Starbucks, I spend way too much money at Sephora, I sleep until noon whenever possible. There is just one aspect of my existence that it's somewhat perturbing. I don't see what everyone else sees in the mirror. Well, even that's not entirely accurate. Sometimes I do, sometimes I see myself staring back, with my ghost-white skin and my large green eyes. And then, sometimes, I see something else. It's hard to explain, but I'll try. See, think about your average mirror. Let's say, the mirror in a hotel room. How many people do you think have looked into just one hotel room's mirror? How many lives has that mirror witnessed passing through its glass? If a mirror had a memory, would it remember all those lives? Well, how about I let you in on a little secret? Mirrors do have memories, and I can see them. It's not as spectacular as it sounds, really. Some days, instead of seeing my own face staring back at me, I see someone else's. For example, when I was growing up in a rickety old farmhouse in rural Minnesota, sometimes I would look in the mirror and see my mother's face staring back at me. I'd recognize her in the twist and glint of her eyes, although she was clearly several years younger in the mirror. Sometimes I'd see her standing there with a large swell of belly that told me she was pregnant. Sometimes I saw her standing there in her wedding dress. Okay, it really is kind of spectacular. Over the years, I've grown to enjoy this particular gift. If I'm in a new building and I have the time, I like to search out the girls' bathroom and see what other kinds of faces have passed through the building before me. Sometimes I'll see something interesting, like an elderly woman pulling faces at herself. Most of the time, they're just normal people, and as I watch them in the mirror, I construct for them little life stories. I don't just see people, I see possibilities. I've always thought that my ability was a gift, until now. The first thing I did after graduating college and landing a job in a nearby city was get a cheap apartment downtown. Anything to ensure that I didn't have to live with my parents any longer than necessary. Sorry, Mom and Dad. I considered myself lucky that I had found such a nice apartment at such a low price. It had 2 bedrooms and each bedroom had its own bathroom. Crazy, huh? It was well within my budget, which probably meant that the neighborhood was too loud or too dangerous or something. I was pleasantly surprised to find that everything seemed pretty normal. The first thing I did after getting moved into my new place was check the mirror in my bedroom's bathroom. I walked in and out of the frame until someone other than myself appeared. I almost didn't notice it was another woman at first glance. We looked so much alike. She could have been my long-lost sister. She looked to be a few years older than me, and she smiled back at me with a radiant happiness that was absolutely breathtaking. I paced a few more times before I saw a man. He was ruggedly handsome, with a very appealing 5 o'clock shadow. I wondered if they were connected, or if they'd been separate tenants at separate times. A few more paces showed them standing together at the sink, brushing their teeth and jostling each other, laughing. They looked so sweet. It didn't take a genius to realize that they were in love. I was pleased with my discovery, happy to share my apartment with their memories. With a smile, I returned to my room to unpack my things. I got settled into my apartment pretty quickly, and life went on as usual. A lot of people, when they found out what happened, asked how it was that I didn't notice something was wrong, especially the people who know about my ability. What people don't understand is that, as humans, we so often see what we want to see, what we expect to see. Everything that is incongruous with our desired reality is rationalized away until it becomes too big to ignore. That's why I wasn't overly concerned with the oddities of the apartment. To begin with, I would occasionally notice an odd smell that seemed to waft in from the walls themselves. It was a strange smell, a little sharp and unpleasant, but so faint I could barely tell it was there most of the time. I asked my building manager, and she told me it had been a problem after the last tenants moved out. The apartment had been scrubbed and scrubbed, but nothing would get rid of the smell. Eventually it faded on its own, and they were able to rent it out again. She sort of shrugged her shoulders at the whole ordeal, and I responded in kind, thinking that it wasn't anything to worry about. Just one of those things, you know? How many sinister things lurk inside just one of those things? I began having strange dreams as well. They weren't bad dreams exactly. It always featured a woman with a hunched-over body and a face hidden by shadows. She'd walk through my apartment crooning a lullaby. She'd walk into my bedroom, peek under the bed, and then I'd wake up. Like I said, not a bad dream, but there was something about it that made me feel uncomfortable. Something that nagged at the back of my brain. Oh well, nothing that I couldn't ignore. No, it wasn't until I saw the difference in the mirror that I began to understand what was deeply wrong. I gave nicknames to the people in the mirror. The woman I named Justine, and the man I named Antoine. For the first few weeks in the apartment, I casually observed the vestiges of their life through my bathroom mirror. They seemed normal enough. Gradually, as the memories in the mirror progressed, I saw their lives change. Namely, Justine got pregnant. As time went on, I saw her standing in front of the mirror, rubbing her belly, a glowing smile plastered all over her face. I saw Antoine staring at her stomach with fascination during their morning rituals. I even saw them engaged in intimate activities, at which point I ran out of the bathroom, my cheeks vaguely resembling a tomato in color. Oh, their lives were wonderful, warm, and loving. And then the memories began to change. It was subtle at first, almost to be expected, really. She had to be, 6 months pregnant now? And it was obvious that they were getting stressed. Antoine began to lose weight, his skin taking on a deathly pale cast as he adjusted to live with his pregnant wife. Justine looked constantly exhausted. I stopped seeing them in the mirror together, which led me to believe they weren't spending as much time together. Sometimes Justine would stand in front of the mirror and cry, staring at the swell of her belly like it was at fault. Sometimes Antoine would just stare into the mirror for hours, his eyes unblinking, his mouth slack and breathing heavy. All the while, the smell grew stronger and the dreams became more frequent. Then, for a few days, everything stopped. My reflection was the only thing that greeted me each time I stepped in front of the mirror. I had normal dreams. The apartment smelled like the lavender air fresheners I buy almost compulsively. But I couldn't relax. I was jittery and nervous, feeling as though I was constantly on the edge of a panic attack. Somehow, I intuitively understood that this was the calm before the storm. Oh, and what a storm it was. I woke up one night, the strange lullaby dream returning for the first time in a week. I jolted awake in my bed, my heart pounding as though in the throes of a nightmare. My throat was tight and my breathing heavy. I shook my head, trying to clear away the trappings of sleep, as I rose to my feet and headed towards the door to the bathroom. I flicked on the light and blanched at what I saw in the mirror. At first, I thought that something awful must have happened in my bathroom. The walls in the mirror were smeared with red, adorned here and there with suspicious-looking chunks. My head whipped around on instinct, but I found those same whitewashed walls that I'd been accustomed to seeing, and I relaxed only just. Something awful had happened in this room, that much was true, but it wasn't happening right now. Well, except in the mirror. Antoine stood in the mirror, staring at himself, much as I'd seen him do before the memories had stopped showing themselves. Tear tracks stood stark against his otherwise bloody face. He looked as though he'd been bathed in red. Oh, I didn't want to think of the implications of that. His arms looked a little strange. It was almost as though he was carrying something, but whatever it might have been was cut off by the bottom of the mirror. He stared into the mirror for a while before turning around and walking out of the bathroom. Against all instinct and better judgment, I followed him. As I re-entered my bedroom, that awful sour smell grew stronger. My eyes were drawn immediately to the bed, as I remembered the woman in my dream, the way she crooned her song to something underneath the bed. Something had to be under there. I yanked and pulled the bed away from the wall, revealing the slightly cleaner carpet underneath. Following my gut, I pulled a knife from my bedside table and began to cut away at the carpet. There were hardwood floors underneath. Nice ones, too. Isn't that a little strange, I thought? But it soon became obvious as to why they'd been covered. Dark stains appeared as I cut out a large swath of carpet. Blood. My eyes raked over the hardwood floor. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw it. The slight gap in the floorboards. That tiny little incongruity that told me that it had, at one point, been removed. Swallowing hard, I slit the tip of the knife under the board and pried it open. Oh, the smell assaulted me full force as I leaned over and looked inside. After that, my memory is mostly blank. All I remember is the sound of screams and slowly realizing that they were coming from me. The police were there within the hour. Apparently I'd been shrieking loud enough to wake my next-door neighbors, and no matter how hard they banged on my front door, I simply wouldn't open it. I thought they were going to arrest me for sure once they saw what was underneath the floorboards. Not that I much cared at the moment. I was too busy trying to scrub the memory from my brain, knowing for certain that I'd never succeed. To my immense surprise, one of the cops on the scene pulled me away from the apartment and sat with me outside, his eyes dripping with sympathy. I expected them to ask questions. I was, once again, surprised when they told me a story instead. A story about a young couple who had lived in the apartment before me, about how their lives seemed perfect to anyone who knew them, about how the husband had slowly gone insane and murdered his wife in a nighttime rampage just a few years ago, about how her body had to be recovered from all different parts of the state. They told me they hadn't found everything, that some pieces of her were missing, pieces they'd assumed would never be recovered. They hadn't expected that something could still be inside that very apartment. And they certainly hadn't expected that something to be the mangled remains of Justine's fetus. The story got some attention, as morbid stories do. The police department came under heavy fire for failing to uncover the body in my apartment. That's what they called it, a body. That word can never describe the twisted ball of flesh that greeted me when I pried up the floorboards. Barely recognizable, but for a smattering of tiny fingers and feet and limbs. The building manager didn't fare much better than the police. People wanted to know why she hadn't reported the smell. She chose not to comment. Obviously, I don't live in that apartment anymore. I moved to a new city entirely, my employer taking pity on me and giving me a transfer. In fact, the company I work for helped me finance a nice new place, one that, to the best of their knowledge, hadn't been the site of any unspeakable murders. Even so, do you know what I did first and foremost when I moved into my new place? I smashed every single mirror in the apartment and bought new ones of my own.